There was to have been a panel discussion at this point. I have inhaled the entire panel. Instead of the panel, I'm going to make, I hope, a very short, maybe 5 minutes or less, intervention addressing some of the points that have come up. The last two speakers mentioned the Defiant Requiem, and part of the reason that we're here now is actually because of the Defiant Requiem, even though the representatives of the Defiant Requiem are not here. Now, the Defiant Requiem, this reenactment of the Verdi Requiem, struck many of us, particularly scholars, as really being, if you'll forgive the expression, beyond the pale. Many of us really had a visceral reaction, but like Brett, who this morning didn't just go with his visceral reaction, which is easy to do, but pushed up against it and wondered why. Why did we have this reaction? And perhaps oversimplifying it, I saw it as a typical of, again, a certain tension between different approaches, between an approach that stresses reflection and one that prizes action. And for all the attempts at integration, even those I've spoken about, I still feel, whether it's in academia or elsewhere, a constant tension, because people of action have to make choices, have to make definite choices, and those who can sit back and reflect can always be highly critical of all those choices. So one of the things I had wanted was, for this event, was to have conversations between those different points of view. And this also comes under the heading of who are we to judge? There's so much judging going on about who is in the right and who's tasteful and who's less tasteful. And the larger question, which we raised in the first panel, is considering our implication today in so many unsavory aspects in our society and the world. How do we set ourselves up as judges? By what right do we do that? By what right? And I guess I want to say something that struck me as depressing, but kind of wake up. My father was one of the soldiers who liberated Dachau, and he made up something I found years later, which he never showed us, a little book with his little, he took pictures with his little brownie camera, and he wrote a text to it, a little book, which is now, thanks to Brett's intervention in the Holocaust Memorial. And it goes closer and closer, and it comes to a pile of naked bodies in a room. And I decided it was time for me to show this to the archivist at Dachau. And he looked at it, and he looked at it, he thanked me very much, and he said, I want to talk to you about this pile of bodies. He said, this pile of bodies was kind of famous. Your father wasn't the only one who took a picture of it, because we left it there on purpose, or it was left there by the American authorities on purpose, to use as propaganda. So senators, congressmen who came from the States were shown it. People from the town of Dachau, including the mayor, were shown it, each for different reasons. And then he looked at me and he said, because you've been so kind to bring it, I'll tell you something we don't tell everybody. After a few weeks, we had to do something with the bodies, or they had to do something with the bodies, and so they put them in the ovens and burned them. Now, this tells us many things. One of the things it tells us, of course, is that the big crime wasn't the burning in the ovens, it was everything that happened before. But it also asks questions about this whole period, and one of the ways I try to grasp it is through what Primo Levi calls the gray zone. That when you're involved in this kind of inquiry, it's hard to know what's down and what's up, what's right and what's wrong, who is entitled to judge and on what basis. And this idea of the gray zone implicates us all. So I would suggest, again, if we're going to have a Barbie award, say for tasteless covers, then we need a Scola award for the scholars who have made their bones and careers by doing work on the Holocaust. So in that sense, we're all implicated. And since there is not yet a test which can divulge the nature of human intentions, it's not a matter of knowledge, but one of faith and trust that the people who claim to be doing something that they believe in are indeed doing it for a reason that might be meaningful to them, and to not immediately assume that they've got some venal or manipulative reason for doing it. So I think the gray zone, for me, is not only a metaphor for the Holocaust, but a metaphor for trying to understand the past. And I guess the way I'd frame that part of it would simply be in response to Jim, to say, our work is sort of what happens when, after we've written all the letters to the little girl and chosen one scenario or the other, the real doll shows up, and then we have to explain what's going on. Thank you very much.